And now we're going to begin reading our story, Esperanza Rising. As we are reading this book, we're going to be analyzing a lot of the characters, especially the main character in the story, Esperanza. And as we're reading, I want you guys to think about this big question. Will Esperanza rise to the challenges of her new life? As we continue to read this book, you're going to be hearing about a lot of different things that come into her life and a lot of challenges that she has to face. And we're going to constantly refer back to this question. Will Esperanza rise to the challenges of her new life? Today, we're going to just read the first chapter of the story. And as we're reading, you're going to hear a couple words that possibly you may not know. Three of them I'm going to talk about before we start. The first word is elegant. The word elegant means graceful or stylish in appearance. So when you hear that word, it'll just be referring to describing someone as graceful or stylish in appearance. The next word is a premonition. A premonition is a strong feeling that something is going to happen. A lot of times premonitions are associated with bad things that are going to happen. And our last vocabulary word that we're going to go over before we start reading is a vaquero. A vaquero is a cowboy, and it's actually a Spanish word. There are some Spanish words in this story, but a lot of times you will hear the meaning of the word right after. So this is the first chapter of Esperanza Rising. The title of the chapter is 1924. Our land is alive, Esperanza, said Papa, taking her small hand as they walked through the gentle slopes of the vineyard. Leafy green vines draped the arbors, and the grapes were ready to drop. Esperanza was 6 years old and loved to walk with her papa through the winding rows, gazing up at him and watching his eyes dance with love for the land. This whole valley breathes and lives, he said, sweeping his arm toward the distant mountains that guarded them. It gives us the grapes, and then they welcome us. He gently touched a wild tendril that reached into the row, as if it had been waiting to shake his hand. He picked up a handful of earth and studied it. Did you know that when you lie down on the land, you can feel it breathe? That you can feel its heart beating? Poppy, I want to feel it, she said. Come. They walked to the end of the row, where the incline of the land formed a grassy swell. Papa lay down on his stomach and looked up at her, patting the ground next to him. Esperanza smoothed her dress and knelt down. Then, like a caterpillar, she slowly inched flat next to him, their faces looking at each other. The warm sun pressed on one of Esperanza's cheeks and the warm earth on the other. She giggled. Shh, he said. You can only feel the earth's heartbeat when you are still and quiet. She swallowed her laughter and after a moment said, I can't hear it, Poppy. Wait a little while and the fruit will fall into your hand. You must be patient, Esperanza. She waited and lay silent, watching Papa's eyes, and then she felt it. Softly at first, a gentle thumping, then stronger, a resounding thud, thud, thud against her body. She could hear it too, the beat rushing in her ears. Shh, shh, shh. She stared at Papa, not wanting to say a word, not wanting to lose the sound, not wanting to forget the feel of the heart of the valley. She pressed closer to the ground until her body was breathing with the earth's and with Papa's, the three hearts beating together. She smiled at Papa, not needing to talk, her eyes saying everything, and his smile answered hers, telling her that he knew she had felt it. Las Lluvias, 6 years later. Papa handed Esperanza the knife. The short blade was curved, its fat wooden handle fitting snugly in her palm. This job was usually reserved for the eldest son of a wealthy rancher. But since Esperanza was an only child and Papa's pride and glory, she was always given the honor. Last night she had watched Papa sharpen the knife back and forth across a stone, so she knew the tool was edged like a razor. Watch your fingers, said Papa. The August sun promised a dry afternoon in the Aguas Lacientes, Mexico. Everyone who lived and worked in El Rancho de las Rosas was gathered at the edge of the field. That's Ranch of the Roses in English. Esperanza's family, the house servants in their long white aprons, the vaqueros already sitting on their horses, ready to ride out to the cattle, and 50 or 60 campesinos, straw hats in their hands, holding their own knives, ready. The campesinos, I think they must be some kind of field workers because the story is saying that they had straw hats in their hand, they had knives, and they were ready to ride out with the cattle. So that's what I think they are. They were covered top to bottom in long sleeve shirts, baggy pants tied at the ankles with string, and bandanas wrapped around their foreheads and necks to protect them from the sun, dust, and spiders. Esperanza, on the other hand, wore a light silk dress that stopped above her summer boots and no hat. On top of her head, a wide satin ribbon was tied in a big bow, the tails trailing in her long black hair. The clusters were heavy on the vine and ready to deliver. Esperanza's parents, Ramona and Sixto Ortega, stood nearby. Mama, tall and elegant, her hair in the usual braided wreath that crowned her head. And Papa, barely taller than Mama, his graying mustache twisted up at the sides. He swept his hand toward the grapevines, signaling Esperanza. When she walked toward the arbors and glanced back at her parents, they both smiled and nodded, encouraging her forward. When she reached the vines, she separated the leaves and carefully grasped a thick stem. She put the knife to it, and with a quick swipe, the heavy cluster of grapes dropped into her waiting hand. Esperanza walked back to Papa and handed him the fruit. Papa kissed it and held it up for all to see. Harvest, said Papa. Ole, ole, a cheer echoed around them. The campesinos, the field workers, spread out over the land and began the task of reaping the fields. Esperanza stood between Mama and Papa with her arms linked to theirs and admired the activity of the workers. Poppy, this is my favorite time of year, she said, watching the brightly colored shirts of the workers slowly moving among the arbors. Wagons rattled back and forth from the fields to the big barns where the grapes would be stored until they went to the winery. Is the reason because when the picking is done, it will be someone's birthday and time for a big fiesta, Papa asked? Esperanza smiled. When the grapes delivered their harvest, she always turned another year. This year, she would be 13. The picking would take 3 weeks, and then, like every other year, Mama and Papa will host a fiesta for the harvest and for her birthday. It had taken every day of 3 weeks to put the harvest to bed, and now everyone anticipated the celebration. Esperanza remembered Mama's instructions as she gathered roses from Papa's garden. Tomorrow, bouquets of roses and baskets of grapes on every table. Papa had promised to meet her in the garden, and he never disappointed her. She bent over to pick a red bloom, fully opened, and pricked her finger on a vicious thorn. Big pearls of blood pulsed from the tip of her thumb, and she automatically thought, bad luck. She quickly wrapped her hand in the corner of her apron and dismissed the premonition. Then she cautiously clipped the blown rose that had wounded her. Looking toward the horizon, she saw the last of the sun disappear behind the Sierra Madre. Darkness would settle quickly, and a feeling of uneasiness and worry nagged at her. Where was Papa? He had left early that morning with the vaqueros to work the cattle, and he was always home before sundown, dusty from the mesquite grasslands and stamping his feet on the patio to get rid of the crusty dirt on his boots. Sometimes he even brought beef jerky that the cattlemen had made, but Esperanza had always had to find it first, searching his shirt pockets while he hugged her. Tomorrow was her birthday, and she knew that she would be serenaded at sunrise. Papa and the men who lived on the ranch would congregate below her window, their rich, sweet voices singing the birthday song. She would run to her window and wave kisses to Papa and the others. Then downstairs she would open her gifts. She knew there would be a porcelain doll from Papa. He had given her one every year since she was born. Esperanza's thumb would not stop bleeding. She picked up the basket of roses and hurried from the garden, stopping on the patio to rinse her hand in the stone fountain. As the water soothed her, she looked through the massive wooden gates that opened onto thousands of acres of Papa's land. Esperanza strained her eyes to see a dust cloud. That meant riders were near and that Papa was finally home. But she saw nothing. In the dusky light, she walked around the courtyard to the back of the large adobe and wood house. There she found Mama searching the horizon too. Mama, my finger! An angry thorn stabbed me, said Esperanza. Bad luck, said Mama, confirming the superstition, but she half smiled. They both knew that bad luck could mean nothing more than dropping a pan of water or breaking an egg. Mama put her arms around Esperanza's waist, and both sets of eyes swept over the corrals, stables and servants' quarters that sprawled in the distance. Esperanza was almost as tall as Mama, and everyone said she would someday look just like her beautiful mother. Sometimes, when Esperanza twisted her hair on top of her head and looked in the mirror, she could see that it was almost true. There was the same black hair, wavy and thick, same dark lashes and fair, creamy skin. But it wasn't precisely Mama's face, because Papa's eyes were there too, shaped like fat brown almonds. He is just a little late, said Mama, and part of Esperanza's mind believed her, but the other part scolded him. Mama, the neighbors warned him just last night about the bandits. Mama nodded and bit the corner of her lip in worry. They both knew that even though it was 1930, and the revolution in Mexico had been over for 10 years, there was still resentment against the large landowners. Change had not come fast enough, Esperanza. The wealthy still own most of the land, while some of the poor have not even a garden plot. There are cattle grazing on the big ranches, yet some peasants are forced to eat cats. Papa is sympathetic and has given land to many of his workers. The people know that. But Mama, do the bandits know that? I hope so, said Mama quietly. I've already sent Alfonso and Miguel to look for him. Let's wait inside. Tea was ready in Papa's study, and so was Abuelita. Come, mi nieta, my granddaughter, said Abuelita, holding up yarn and crochet hooks. I'm starting a new blanket and will teach you the zigzag. Esperanza's grandmother, whom everyone called Abuelita, lived with them and was a smaller, older, more wrinkled version of Mama. She looked very distinguished, wearing a respectable black dress, the same gold hoops she wore in her ears every day, and her white hair pulled back into a bun at the nape of her neck. But Esperanza loved her more for her capricious ways than for her propriety. Abuelita might host a group of ladies for a formal tea in the afternoon, then after they had gone, be found wandering barefoot in the grapes, with a book in her hand, quoting poetry to the birds. Although some things were almost the same with Abuelita, a lace-edged handkerchief peeking out from beneath the sleeve of her dress, others were surprising. A flower in her hair, a beautiful stone in her pocket, or a philosophical saying salted into her conversation. When Abuelita walked into a room, everyone scrambled to make her comfortable. Even Papa would give up his chair for her. Esperanza complained, "Must we always crochet to take our minds off worry?" She sat next to her grandmother anyway, smelling her ever-present aroma of garlic, face powder, and peppermint. "What happened to your finger?" asked Abuelita. "A big thorn," said Esperanza. Abuelita nodded and said thoughtfully, "There is no rose without thorns." Esperanza smiled, knowing that Abuelita wasn't talking about flowers at all, but there was no life without difficulties. She watched the silver crochet needle dance back and forth in her grandmother's hand. When a strand of hair fell into her lap, Abuelita picked it up and held it against the yarn and stitched it into the blanket. "Esperanza, in this way, my love, and good wishes will be in the blanket forever. Now watch. 10 stitches up to the top of the mountain, add 1 stitch, 9 stitches down to the bottom of the valley. Skip 1. Esperanza picked up her own crochet needle and copied Abuelita's movements and then looked at her own crocheting. The tops of her mountains were lopsided and the bottoms of her valleys were all bunched up. Abuelita smiled, reached over and pulled the yarn, unraveling all of Esperanza's rows. "Do not be afraid to start over," she said. Esperanza sighed and began again with 10 stitches. Softly humming, Hortensia, the housekeeper, came in with a plate of small sandwiches. She offered one to Mama. "No, thank you," said Mama. Hortensia set the tray down and brought a shawl and wrapped it protectively around Mama's shoulders. Esperanza couldn't remember a time when Hortensia had not taken care of them. She was a Zopotec Indian with a short, solid figure and blue-black hair and a braid down her back. Esperanza watched the two women look out into the dark and couldn't help but think that Hortensia was almost the opposite of Mama. "Don't worry so much," said Hortensia. "Alfonso and Miguel will find him." So we're going to stop our book there for today. And I'll be back next week and we'll read another part of the book. And the next part of the story, we'll find out if Papa's going to show up for Esperanza's big birthday party. I hope he does. And I hope you guys join us again next week as we read the next part of our book and for another exciting ELA lesson. See you guys.